All right. I have with me today two friends from Families Helping Families of Southwest Louisiana, Melinda Elliott, and let's see if Wallace got on. Wallace is not on yet, but hopefully he'll be on later. And they are our co-hosts for today. Our centers are 2 of the 10 nonprofit family resource centers in the Families Helping Families network. And we're here to provide support to parents of children, youth, and adults with disabilities or special health care needs. So please do call on your local Families Helping Families for any supports that you need for disability related issues. Our center is located in Jefferson Parish, and we provide over 100 training opportunities every year on special education and disability related topics. So be sure to check out our calendar of events on our website, fhfofgno.org, and register for any more of these types of trainings that are of interest to you. After today's presentation, you will be sent a PDF of the slide deck. So don't feel like that you need to write down whatever you see or take screenshots or anything. If you lose us at any point, you should have received call-in information with your confirmation email. Feel free to drop questions in the chat box as we go, and we will also have a Q&A time at the end. So let's start by getting a feel for who you are. Are you a youth or a young adult with a disability? Are you a parent of a youth or young adult? Are you an educator or a service provider or another professional? Tell me in the chat box who you are. Wow, parent of a senior in high school. Woohoo! Professional, okay. Parent. We love to have parents on our webinars. Thank you for being here. All right, professionals, parents, parent and an outreach resource specialist. Yeah, we at Families Helping Family Centers wear 2 hats. We're generally parents of a child with a disability, or we have a disability ourselves. And then we are also, of course, professionals now. Parent of a 17-year-old daughter, brain cancer survivor. Wow, absolutely. That's wonderful. Guardian and youth, parent of adult child and a professional. Very good, very good. I'm a parent of an adult child as well. It's hard to believe he's 25, but he is. A professional working with disabilities, as well as a parent of a 19-year-old with TBI. So we have a lot of parents. We have a lot of multiple hat wearers in the audience today. Okay, so hopefully you either work with teens or young adults with disabilities, or you have a child who is in that category, because what we're going to be talking about today, of course, is our introduction to work for youth with disabilities and their families. So I'm going to roll over the slide and let's get started. This is our flyer for this series of webinars on introduction to work for young adults with disabilities and their families. And every week in September, on Thursdays at noon, we're having a different work-related topic. Part 1 of the training was last week, and we examined the family and education's role in supporting youth to acquire appropriate work and career readiness skills. Today, in part 2 of the series, we're going to talk about, or I'm going to give you rather, an overview of laws that support youth with disabilities and career readiness. The third part of the training next week on September 21st will introduce you to a tool called the Independent Futures That Work project. It's a resource, a checklist of sorts, and we'll also talk about work and career readiness skills that are identified on this resource. And then the 4th installment of this Lunch and Learn series will be on Thursday, September 28th. And then we will be providing you with an overview of resources available to support the development of the skills that are identified on that checklist. Do note, if you didn't know already, you have to register for each of these webinars separately to get access to the Zoom link. When you receive this slide deck from me and you download it, you will be able to click on the links on this page so that you can register for the other presentations. Now, the purpose of this four-part training, of course, is to introduce work to youth with disabilities as well as their families. And many families or caregivers of youth with disabilities are not aware of some of the skills that youth and young adults need, or not aware of how to address those skills in order for them to be successfully employed. Also, the laws that are available to ensure the youth's rights are protected, and those laws are very important for you to know. Employment for youth and young adults with disabilities is very low. In 2021, it was around 19%, which is honestly higher than I thought it would be. But one explanation for this low employment rate may be the lack of skills that are necessary for the jobs that are available. And we know that during and after COVID, there has been a huge shift in the workplace. There's been a huge shift just nationally with jobs. So there are actually more opportunities now because there are people begging for workers. So there are probably more opportunities now than there have ever been for youth and young adults to get jobs. Employers are needing people to fill their positions. Before we go too far, let's look at some of the acronyms that you'll see or hear tossed around during this presentation and elsewhere. It's easy to kind of get lost in the acronyms, so we're going to define some of the ones that you'll hear today so that you won't be in the dark, and I'll try to define them as I go, but I don't always. ESSA, E-S-S-A, is Every Student Succeeds Act. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's the law that governs special education and related services. IEP, Individualized Education Program, and that's the document that directs all of the students' special education and related services. FAPE refers to Free Appropriate Public Education, the cornerstone of the federal special education law. LRE refers to Least Restrictive Environment, and that's the place where your child should be receiving their education. WIOA is WIOA. That's how I always thought it was WIOA, but I've been corrected. So WIOA, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. CTE refers to Career and Technical Education Programs, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. Pre-ETS is the Pre-Employment Transition Services, and VR is Vocational Rehabilitation. Our VR provider in Louisiana is LRS, which is the Louisiana Rehabilitation Services. I probably should have put that one on the acronym list as well. And just to let you know, this project is funded through a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, known as OSERS, the Rehabilitation Services Administration, or the RSA, and it's a project of the Alabama Parent Education Center. The RSA Parent Center region that compiled this project includes Parent Center partners in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, which is our center here in Jefferson Parish, Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. The Independent Futures that Work project works to ensure that individuals with disabilities and their families have the skills and knowledge necessary to effectively advocate for vocational, independent living, and other rehabilitation services. So as I already mentioned, this training discusses the key laws that support youth and career readiness. In this part of the four-part series, we'll discuss these laws. ESSA, as I mentioned already, Every Student Succeeds Act. IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Career and Technical Education Act for the 21st century, and that's also known as Perkins 5. Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. So let's start with ESSA. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, is a federal law that was enacted in 2015 to govern education policy in the United States. It includes several provisions that are specifically aimed at improving educational outcomes for students with disabilities. And one of the most significant provisions in ESSA related to students with disabilities is the requirement that states develop and implement statewide accountability systems that include all students, including those with disabilities. And this means that states must assess the academic achievement of students with disabilities and include the results of those assessments in their accountability systems. So under ESSA, states are also required to set goals for the academic achievement of students with disabilities and to include strategies for improving their academic performance in their state plans. In addition, ESSA requires states to provide professional development for educators on how to effectively teach students with disabilities and to use evidence-based interventions to improve their academic outcomes. ESSA also includes provisions related to the use of assistive technology for students with disabilities. States are required to ensure that students with disabilities have access to appropriate assistive technology devices and services, and to provide professional development for educators on how to use assistive technology effectively. And finally, ESSA includes provisions related to the inclusion of students with disabilities in state and district assessments. States must provide accommodations and modifications for students with disabilities to ensure that they can participate in these assessments, and they must report the results of these assessments separately for students with disabilities. So overall, ESSA includes several provisions aimed at improving educational outcomes for students with disabilities. These provisions require states to assess the academic achievement of students with disabilities, to set goals for their academic performance, to provide professional development for educators, to ensure access to assistive technology, and to include students with disabilities in state and district assessments. That's a little bit of an ESSA recap for you. Now let's look at IDEA, and this is probably one that most of us are more familiar with. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, from 2004, is a federal law that governs the education of students with disabilities in the country. IDEA was first enacted in 1975, and it's been amended several times. In 1975, it had a different name, but the most recent amendments were in 2004. IDEA provides a framework for the education of students with disabilities, including their identification, their evaluation, their eligibility for special education and related services as well. The law requires that students with disabilities receive a free appropriate public education, or FAPE, in the least restrictive environment possible, the LRE. And this means that students with disabilities should be educated in regular classrooms with non-disabled peers to the greatest extent possible, and should only be placed in more restrictive settings when it's just absolutely necessary. IDEA also requires that individualized education programs, or IEPs, be developed for each student with a disability. And the IEP is a written document that outlines the student's educational goals and the special education and related services that the student will receive. The IEP is developed by a team that includes the student's parents or guardians, their teachers, and also other school personnel, related service providers, etc. In addition, IDEA requires that parents be provided with procedural safeguards to protect their rights and the rights of their child with a disability. And these safeguards include the right to participate in the development of their child's IEP. the right to obtain an independent educational evaluation, and also the right to request mediation or due process hearings to resolve disputes with the school district. Finally, IDEA includes provisions related to the education of students with disabilities in private schools and the transition of students with disabilities from school to post-secondary education or employment. Overall, IDEA is a comprehensive law that ensures that students with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment possible, and that their educational needs are met through the development of that individualized education program and the procedural safeguards for parents. And our center provides webinars on every single one of these topics pretty much every month. So look over our calendar of events on our website if you're interested in learning more about the different aspects of IDEA and your rights or your child's rights. Now let's look at the transition provisions of IDEA. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004, and that's IDEA, includes transition provisions that are aimed at ensuring that students with disabilities receive the necessary supports and services to transition from school to post-secondary education or employment. One key provision requires that students with disabilities begin receiving transition services by age 16, or even earlier if it's deemed appropriate by the IEP team. And these services are designed to help students with disabilities prepare for life after high school, including post-secondary education, vocational training, or employment. Transition services might include instruction, related services, community experiences, and the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives. IDEA also requires that students with disabilities have a coordinated set of transition activities and services included in their IEP. The coordinated set of activities and services should be based on the student's needs, their strengths, their preferences, and their interests, and it also should take into account the student's goals for their life after high school. The law also requires that schools provide students with disabilities with information about community resources and agencies that can assist with the transition to post-secondary education or employment. And finally, IDEA includes provisions related to the transfer of rights from the parents to the students with disabilities when they reach that age of majority, which in Louisiana is 18. And this means that students with disabilities become responsible for making decisions about their own education and their own transition services unless they have been deemed incompetent under state law. And that would mean if you have, in Louisiana, if you have a continuing tutorship or an interdiction. Overall, the transition provisions within IDEA are designed to ensure that students with disabilities receive the necessary support and services to successfully transition from school to post-secondary education or to employment, and that they're involved in that decision-making process related to their own education and future goals. There's nothing like having somebody else decide what your adult life is going to look like. So it's very important for them to be involved in the decision-making process. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is also a federal law, and it prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities, and it requires employers and agencies receiving federal funds to provide reasonable accommodations to individuals with disabilities. The Rehabilitation Act is divided into several sections, each with its own focus, and we're going to look at a couple different ones. Section 501, for example, requires federal agencies to take affirmative action to employ and advance individuals with disabilities. So not just give them a job, but also give them the opportunity to move up the chain and at the position. Section 503 requires federal contractors and subcontractors to take affirmative action to employ and advance individuals with disabilities as well. Section 504, which may sound familiar, of the Rehabilitation Act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities by recipients of federal financial assistance. So this includes schools, colleges, and universities that receive federal funds. Section 504 requires these entities to provide reasonable accommodations to individuals with disabilities, and that may include modifications to policies, practices, and procedures. Another important section of the Rehabilitation Act is Section 508, which requires federal agencies to ensure that their electronic and information technology is accessible to individuals with disabilities. And that includes their websites, their software, and other electronic information resources. And there's a lot involved in making a website accessible for people with disabilities. So that's no small task. Finally, the Rehabilitation Act includes provisions related to the development of vocational rehabilitation programs for individuals with disabilities. And these programs provide a range of services to help people obtain and maintain employment. And they include things like job training, counseling, and even job placement assistance. So overall, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a comprehensive law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities and requires employers and agencies receiving federal funds to provide reasonable accommodations to those individuals. The law also includes provisions related to accessibility of electronic and information technology, and the development of vocational rehabilitation programs for individuals with disabilities. So that's a little recap of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So how does the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 define disability? Well, it defines disability as any physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And major life activities can include functions like just caring for yourself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and working. And under the Rehabilitation Act, a person with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. They have a record of such impairment, or they're regarded as having such an impairment. And this definition is like the definition of disability used in other federal laws like the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Rehabilitation Act also includes a broader definition of disability that applies specifically to vocational rehabilitation programs. Under this definition, a person with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that constitutes a substantial impediment to employment, and who can benefit from vocational rehabilitation services in terms of an employment outcome. This definition is more focused on the individual's ability to work and obtain employment, and it's used to determine eligibility for vocational rehab services as well. Overall, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, and includes both an individualized and a broader definition depending on the context of the program or the service that's being provided. The next one is the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act for the 21st Century, also referred to as Perkins 5, and that was formerly referred to as the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act. but it's a federal law that provides funding and support for CTEs. That's the career and technical education programs in schools and colleges across the country. This law was reauthorized in 2018 to update and strengthen those career and technical education programs and increase their effectiveness in preparing students for high skill, high wage, and in-demand careers. And that's what we want for our teens and young adults. We want them to have high skill, high wage, in-demand career, something that they look forward to going to every day. One of the key features of Perkins 5 is its focus on equity and access for all students, including those with disabilities. The law requires that CTE programs be accessible to students with disabilities and that they provide accommodations and support to help those students succeed. In addition, the law emphasizes the importance of providing work-based learning opportunities like internships, apprenticeships, and on-the-job training, which can be especially helpful for students with disabilities who may face additional barriers to employment. To further support students with disabilities in CTE programs, Perkins 5 includes provisions to increase access to high-quality career guidance and counseling services that are tailored to the unique needs and abilities of students with disabilities. It includes provisions to encourage collaboration between schools, colleges, and local workforce development boards to ensure that CTE programs align with the needs of local employers and provide opportunities for students with disabilities to gain meaningful work experience. The Perkins 5 includes provisions to provide professional development and training for educators and other personnel to help them to better support students with disabilities in those CTE programs. And Perkins 5 includes provisions to promote research and evaluation of promising practices for supporting students with disabilities in CTE programs, and to disseminate information about effective strategies to schools and colleges across the country. So overall, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act for the 21st century, the Perkins 5, recognizes the importance of preparing all students, including those with disabilities, for success in the modern workforce by providing funding, resources, and support to CTE programs that prioritize equity and access. This law helps ensure that students with disabilities have the skills, knowledge, and experience they need to achieve those career goals and to contribute to their communities. That's what I want for my child. My adult child, he's a man child now, but I want him to be a contributing member of his community. That's very important to our family. And when you have a child who doesn't speak, or a child who has significant disabilities, that's something that you really want. You want them to be a part of their surroundings and their neighborhood, their town. The next law is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. And it's a federal law also that provides funding and guidelines for workforce development programs, including those that serve individuals with disabilities. WIOA aims to increase access to education, training, and employment opportunities for everyone, all individuals, including youth with disabilities. WIOA supersedes or amends several other acts, and those you see at the top of this slide. Some key changes to the definition for youth include out-of-school youth ages 16 to 24, and that includes dropouts, graduates, those with low income, deficits in basic skills, ESL or English language learners, juvenile or adult justice systems, those who are homeless in foster care, pregnant or parenting, and individuals with disabilities, as well as others. So all of those groups are included in the out-of-school youth ages 16 to 24. In-school youth ages 14 to 21, which includes attending school, low income, deficits in basic skills, English language learners, juvenile or adult service system, homeless, foster care, pregnant or parenting, individuals with disabilities, and others as well. So just in school and out of school youth. Under WIOA, youth with disabilities are provided with a range of services to help them achieve their education and employment goals. And these services may include career counseling, job training, apprenticeships, as well as support for transitioning from school to work, because that is a difficult transition. WIOA also mandates that vocational rehabilitation services be provided to youth with disabilities, including those who are transitioning out of special education programs. In addition, WIOA requires that state and local workforce development boards develop strategies to increase the participation of individuals with disabilities in workforce programs. And this includes providing accommodations and supports to ensure that individuals with disabilities can fully participate in training and employment. Overall, WIOA represents an important effort to increase access to employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities, including youth, and to ensure that they have the skills and resources they need to succeed in the workforce. I've seen changes in some of the workforce training programs that I've had contact with in the last few years. I was talking, I wish I could remember the name of this program, but I was talking to one of the people who work in that program, and he was telling me that they've changed the attendance requirements so that what used to be a 6-week program is now kind of open-ended, so that it can accommodate people with special health care needs who may miss some of the classes, as well as people with disabilities who may just take longer to complete the course. So he was saying that the 6-week course could take double that, or even triple, but it's still available to people, to be able to go through. Let's look at WIOA and pre-ETS. The pre-employment transition services, pre-ETS, are a key component of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, as they help youth with disabilities to prepare for employment and post-secondary education opportunities. Pre-ETS, again, pre-employment transition services, pre-ETS are designed to help students with disabilities to explore career options, to develop employability skills, and to gain work-based learning experiences before they leave high school. Be sure that pre-ETS is a part of your child's transition plan in their IEP by the time they turn 16, which is the age that schools must begin transition goals in Louisiana. Okay, pre-ETS needs to be part of your child's program when they are of transition age. WIOA requires that each state provide pre-ETS to all students with disabilities who are eligible or potentially eligible for vocational rehab services. Pre-ETS are provided in a variety of settings like schools, vocational rehabilitation agencies, and community-based organizations. And pre-ETS services might include things like job exploration counseling. This involves exploring career options and the skills, education, and training required for various jobs. So that's a good service. Pre-ETS services may include work-based learning experiences, and this includes internships, apprenticeships, and other on-the-job training opportunities. It might include counseling on post-secondary education, and this includes assistance with applying for college or for other post-secondary education and training programs. Pre-ETS services might include workplace readiness training, and this includes soft skills training like communication, teamwork, and problem solving. Pre-ETS may include instruction in self-advocacy, and this involves teaching students how to communicate their needs and how to advocate for themselves in the workplace. Like if they need a small accommodation, they need to be able to speak to their employer and request that small accommodation. So overall, pre-ETs are an important part of WIOA's efforts to help youth with disabilities transition from school to work and to achieve their career goals. By providing these services, WIOA aims to increase the employment rates of individuals with disabilities and to promote their economic self-sufficiency, which of course is the goal for everyone, every adult. Now, next is the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. And it's also a federal law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in various aspects of life, including employment, public accommodations, transportation, telecommunications, and government services. It was signed into law in 1990, and then it was amended in 2008. So under the ADA, employers with 15 or more employees are required to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with disabilities if those accommodations don't cause undue hardship to the employer. Public accommodations such as restaurants, stores, and hotels are also required to make their facilities accessible to people with disabilities, including providing accessible parking, accessible entrances, and restrooms. The ADA also requires that public transportation systems provide accessible services and that telecommunications companies offer services that are accessible to people with hearing or speech disabilities. This law also prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in state and local government services, including voting, and requires that government buildings and programs be accessible. The ADA has been instrumental in improving access and opportunities for people with disabilities in many areas of life, but there's still work to be done to ensure full inclusion and equal access for all. I do hope that this information has been relevant and important to you, and that you can take away some pieces that you can use in your personal or your professional life, or both, for those of you who are wearing multiple hats like myself. I've put in the chat box a link to a very brief survey that gives you the opportunity to tell us what you thought about today's webinar. Our funders require that we offer you the opportunity to give us feedback on these trainings. And so the surveys keep them happy and keep our educational offerings free and keep me employed. So the evaluation survey also gives you a way to request a certificate of attendance for today's training if you provide your email address and your name when it comes to that question. Otherwise, it's anonymous, so I won't know who's requesting it. I'll be sending you an email either later today or sometime tomorrow with the PowerPoint. And if there were any handouts, I don't think there were for this one, but definitely with the PowerPoint slide deck. And when you download the slide deck, you will be able to access any links that were on it, especially the registration links that were at the beginning. If you are listening to a recording of this webinar and would like to obtain a copy of the slide deck with the additional resources, please email our center at info@fhfofgno.org, and we will gladly send you the PowerPoint. Now there's contact information on this screen for you in case you need to reach out for assistance or for more information. And of course, Families Helping Families is here to guide you with any transition issues that you may be having with your young adult who has a disability. So let me see if my co-hosts are on yet. I want to take questions. Yep, looks like I've got both of them. Wallace and Melinda are both here from Families Helping Families of Southwest Louisiana. Thank you, guys. And if you have any questions, then hopefully they will help me answer them. Feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can open your mic and ask out loud if you prefer. Ashley, I see you here. Thank you for coming. Ashley works with Louisiana Rehabilitation Services, LRS, which is the vocational rehab center for Louisiana. I know that there are some other folks here also from those agencies. Any questions, any comments, any further information from those of you who are professionals who would like to share anything? All right. Well, please click on that link in the chat box before you leave the webinar so that you can give me some feedback on today's. This is a part 2 of a 4-part series, and we would really like to get your feedback on how you like this format and how you like the information as it's being presented. All right. You all have a great afternoon, and we'll see you again soon.